There are some people who have walked this planet that leave behind them a legacy so profound that their name is remembered for generations. They affect society and draw around them followers. Sometimes these people become messiahs. Sometimes they become serial killers. Nostradamus will be remembered in the annals of history, firstly as a prophet and seer. Others will remember him as a con artist, thief and liar. As is ever the case, it is often a matter of belief. Welcome to the world of the world's most famous and infamous prophet. Welcome to Nostradamus. Nostradamus was a physician who believed he could predict the future. He published these predictions in the Profecias. Some believe they have, or will, come true. Others believe that they are the ramblings of a madman, or even a method of making money. He was born Michel de Nostradamus in Saint-Rémy de Provence, France, in 1503. He was one of 9 children. His parents were Rainier de Saint-Rémy and her husband James de Nostradamus, who was a grain dealer and a notary of Jewish descent. The family name was altered when his grandfather converted to Catholicism to avoid persecution. We know very little about his childhood, other than he seems to have been fairly intelligent and did well in school. He learned Latin, Greek, Hebrew and mathematics, and some believe he was taught ancient Jewish mythology and astrology by his grandfather. It is said he studied medicine and became a doctor. The story goes that he treated plague victims in France and Italy. The tale gets more interesting when we read that he had a kind of psychic awakening and started to practice the occult and astrology. Soon he was making predictions about the future. But his journey into the mystical world begins at the age of 14, when he entered the University of Avignon to study medicine. After only 1 year, he was forced to leave because of an outbreak of the plague. He claims that he decided to travel across the country at this time, seeking out cures and working as an apothecary. By 1522, he was once again back in university. This time he was in Montpellier to try and finish his doctorate in medicine. The Catholic priests in authority didn't like his interest in astrology and his previous work as an apothecary, and so he was dismissed. Other accounts state that he in fact did finish his doctorate in 1525, but this part of the tale is very sketchy and not to be trusted. It was at this time of reinvention that he changed his name to Nostradamus in place of Nostradamus, and let this be a pointer upon the road of this man's life, that he did reinvent himself. In fact, he created himself. He wrote his own biography as he moved along, and so be careful of what you are told about the man. Historians often dismiss 99% of the tales that can be found on the internet. For the next few years, Nostradamus travelled throughout France and Italy. We are led to believe that he wandered around treating the people of plague. Instead of the usual bloodletting and mercury-poisoned potions, we are told that this clever half-doctor instead introduced hygiene controls and the removal of infected corpses from the streets. He invented a rose pill, which was a lozenge made of rose hips, which is now known to be high in vitamin C. It may have aided those with minor plague symptoms. Through the use of this lozenge, hygiene, low-fat diets and fresh air, Nostradamus made a name for himself as a kind of miracle doctor. Soon, the money started to roll in from the citizens of Provence, who appreciated his skills. In 1531, he was invited to work with a leading scholar of the time, Jules César Scaliger, in Agen in southwestern France. There he married, and in the next few years had 2 children. In 1534, his wife and children died, presumably of the plague, while he was travelling on a medical mission to Italy. Not being able to save his wife and children caused him to fall out of favour in the community and with his patron Scaliger. By 1538 he was being accused of heresy and ordered to appear before the Catholic Inquisition, and so he duly escaped to Italy, Greece and Turkey for a few years to let the heat dissipate. During his travels to the ancient mystery schools, it is believed that Nostradamus experienced a psychic awakening. One of the legends of Nostradamus says that during his travels in Italy, he came upon a group of Franciscan monks, identifying one as the future pope. The monk, called Felice Peretti, was ordained Pope Sixtus V in 1585, fulfilling the prediction of Nostradamus. He was soon pretty sure he'd escaped the clutches of the Inquisition, and so returned to France, where in 1547 he settled down in his hometown of Salon de Provence. He then proceeded to cleverly marry a wealthy widow called Anne Ponsard. They had 6 children together, and he published 2 books on medical science. Things were looking good. It didn't take long for him to move more and more away from medical science and towards the world of the occult. The story goes that he would spend many hours alone in his study, staring into a bowl of clear water, whereupon he received his visions of future events. By 1550, he had completed his first almanac of prophecies based upon his visions and astrology. He was in fact cashing in on one of the most popular genres at the time. Almanacs were used for all manner of things, from farmers and merchants to just pure entertainment. His book was very well received, and fame of this amazing mystic spread rapidly across France. And so he wrote more. By 1554, his focus was almost entirely on the prophecies, and he decided to write a grand opus entitled Centuries. The plan was for 10 volumes, which would contain 100 predictions forecasting the next 2,000 years. in 1555 he published the Profecias, which was a huge collection of his major long-term predictions. He claimed that the obscure nature of his prophecies was in order to avoid the scrutiny of the Catholic Church. He wrote them in what are known as quatrains, or 4-line verses. He mixed in Greek, Latin, Italian and Provençal to confuse things even more. They were a kind of clever 16th century puzzle book that allowed readers to see almost anything they wanted to. A win-win situation. There were many accusations. Some said he was the servant of the devil, and others said he was either a fraud or simply insane, but his followers grew and grew. Thousands started to believe that his prophecies were spiritually inspired. Soon, the elite across Europe began to demand his books and presents. Catherine de' Medici, who was the wife of King Henry II of France, counted herself amongst his greatest followers. His 1555 almanac hinted at a great threat to the royal family, and so he was summoned to appear before Catherine in Paris to explain himself. He dutifully explained and proceeded to draw up astrological charts for the royal children. He was soon made royal counsellor and physician to King Henry's court. Nostradamus also explained to the royals that one of his previous predictions from the book Centuries I told of a young lion who would overcome the older one on the field of battle. The young lion would pierce the older one's eye. He explained that in truth he wanted the king to avoid a jousting match. Alas, 3 years later, King Henry, then 41 years old, died when jousting and a lance pierced his eye and entered his brain. He died an agonising death 10 days later from infection. But just how did Nostradamus manage to come up with these predictions? Well, he claimed that he used what is known as judicial astrology. This is when future events can supposedly be predicted by calculating the relationships between stellar bodies and the Earth. He said he used classical sources such as Plutarch and medieval chronicles. This may in fact be true, because modern historians claim that what Nostradamus really did was to steal ancient end-of-the-world prophecies from places such as the Bible, and then, using his astrological readings of the past, he simply projected them forward. Professional astrologers actually said he was incompetent and that such a method would not work. His skills, however, did not help him with his own gout and arthritis, and in the last few years of his life he developed dropsy. This is known as edema, and it simply means that fluid accumulates beneath the skin and cavities of the body and can cause heart failure. In June 1566 he knew the end was closing in and drew up a will, leaving almost everything to his wife and children. He told his secretary, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." The next morning, he was reportedly found dead, lying on the floor next to his bed. His life's work had a profound effect upon the people of Europe. They mainly dealt with war, disasters, death, plagues, earthquakes, floods, droughts, and murder. Thousands of followers across the centuries firmly believe that Nostradamus created the most accurate prophecies of any mystic throughout time. Others say he was nothing but a charlatan. It is believed he predicted the French Revolution, the rise of Adolf Hitler and Napoleon, the attacks of September the 11th, and even the atomic bomb. The beauty of the vagueness of his writings means that almost anything can be attributed to them. To this day, the works are being researched by adherents to see if they can discover future events. Looking back over them, it is child's play to attribute events to past writings because they can be taken so many ways. However, regardless of our 21st century analytical science, let us ask the question: is it possible that a mystic from the 16th century could somehow look into the future? He did in fact make over 1,000 predictions, and some followers claim over half of these have already come true. It's now time to investigate some of these to seek out the truth. We turn to the most famous, the prediction of the death of King Henry II of France. Here's what Nostradamus wrote: "The young lion will overcome the older one on the field of combat in a single battle. He will pierce his eyes through a golden cage. 2 wounds made 1. Then he dies a cruel death." As we have already seen, Henry was warned not to joust, but he did. King Henry II, as the older lion, faced the Comte de Montgomery as the young lion. Both combatants had lions on their shields. In the final pass, Montgomery thrust his lance through the king's visor. The lance split into 2 shards, or, as Nostradamus said, the 2 wounds made one. One went through Henry's eye and one through his temple. 10 days later, the old lion was dead. So what about another famous prediction, the Great Fire of London? Here's what Nostradamus said. The blood of the just will be demanded of London, burnt by fire in the year 66. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, and many of the same sect will be killed. Here's what happened. In 1666, on September the 2nd, a small fire started in a bakery in London. The result was a massive fire that lasted for 3 days and consumed the city. What exactly the blood of the just means, nobody is sure. Some believe it refers to the millions of rats that died. Either way, it seems a pretty clever and accurate prediction. An even bigger and far-reaching prediction is that of the French Revolution. Here's what Nostradamus said. From the enslaved populace, songs, chants and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons. These will, in the future, by headless idiots, be received as divine prayers. Well, the enslaved peasants did rise up with chants and demands. Indeed, they even wrote songs. They took control of Paris because they had simply had enough of the way the aristocracy were treating them. These princes and lords were held captive and did have their heads taken off with the infamous guillotine. However, much of this could relate to many periods of revolt in history, and there is no mention of specifics. So what about that famous Hitler prediction? Here's what Nostradamus said. From the depths of the west of Europe, a young child will be born of poor people. He, who by his tongue will seduce a great troop. His fame will increase towards the realm of the east. Beasts ferocious with hunger will cross the rivers. The greater part of the battlefield will be against Hister. Into a cage of iron will the great one be drawn, when the child of Germany's observes nothing. Well, this is quite different. There are plenty of specifics to play with. What happened in history, and does it relate to the prediction? Hitler was in fact born on April the 20th, 1889 in Western Europe to very poor parents. Nostradamus said he would be from the depths of the west of Europe, a young child born of poor people. Well, that's pretty close. Hitler moved to Germany after World War I and did in fact rise to be a legendary leader through his amazing methods of speaking. Hundreds of experts in propaganda and marketing have studied this clever hypnotising methods. So when Nostradamus said by his tongue will seduce a great troop, he was pretty damn close. When Nostradamus said his fame will increase towards the realm of the East, was he really talking about how Hitler created a massive alliance with Japan? When Nostradamus said, beasts ferocious with hunger will cross rivers, was he really talking about the way the beasts of the German army crossed river after river to invade and conquer France and most of Europe? When Nostradamus said, the greater part of the battlefield will be against Hitler, was he really talking about how the rest of the world created a grand alliance to take him and his Nazi party down? Apart from the obvious misspelling of Hitler, this is a pretty clever set of links to something that Nostradamus could never have known about. In fact, Hitler was a name for the river Danube, and Hitler was born on the banks of the river Danube in Austria. It is also claimed that Nostradamus predicted the atomic bomb. Here's what he said. Near the gates and within 2 cities there will be scourges the like of which was never seen. Famine within plague, people put out by steel, crying to the great immortal God for relief. How can this really have anything to do with the atomic bomb? Well, in 1945, the USA did in fact drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan. In fact, 2 cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So this explains the line, near the gates, within 2 cities. The scourges, the likes of which have never been seen, obviously could mean a superweapon such as the atom bomb. Indeed, thousands survived the horrendous ordeal and were crying to the great immortal God for relief due to their radiation poisoning. Even further into the future for Nostradamus were the murders of John F. Kennedy and his brother Bobby Kennedy. Many saw this golden family as modern-day royalty coming to the rescue of the USA, and the world in a time of Cold War and fear. They were truly seen by many as great. Here's what Nostradamus predicted. The great man will be struck down in the day by a thunderbolt, an evil deed foretold by the bearer of a petition. According to the prediction, another falls at night time. Conflict at Rheims, Long, and a pestilence in Tuscany. Well, the great man was struck down after receiving many death threats, deeds that were foretold. On November the 22nd, 1963, JFK was gunned down as if by a thunderbolt. 5 years later, Bobby Kennedy was killed just after midnight, or, as Nostradamus said, another falls at night time. The date, September the 11th, 2001, is now ingrained in the minds of all modern people. The day the terrorists struck. But did you know many believe Nostradamus predicted the attacks? Here's what he said. Earth-shaking fire from the centre of the earth will cause tremors around the new city. 2 great rocks will war for a long time. Then Arethusa will redden a new river. This is claimed to actually be about 911. In fact, it is slightly twisted by modern conspiracy theories. The original quatrain reads, "Sea of fire at the world's centre, the tower of the new city will tremble. 2 great blocks will be at war for a long time. Then Arethusa will redden a new river." Yes, 2 towers were taken out by terrorists, or as the followers believe, the 2 great rocks. The World Trade Center is thought to have something to do with the statement, "fire from the centre of the earth." The problem here is when Nostradamus wrote these, there was a new city, and it was Napoli, which lies between 2 great and powerfully dangerous rocks known as volcanoes. He was in fact simply talking about earthquakes hitting Napoli, as they often have. This often causes the sea to rise and redden. Arethusa was in fact a Greek water nymph that would rise, nothing more. However, while we are on the subject of earthquakes, there is in fact a prediction from Nostradamus about a coming earthquake that many believe predicts a terrible disaster in California. Here's what he said. "The sloping park, great calamity, through the lands of the west and Lombardy. The fire in the ship, plague and captivity, Mercury in Sagittarius, Saturn fading." This may not yet have come true. Followers have to decide what it may mean. The sloping park, great calamity, is thought to literally mean earthquake, sloping earth causing calamity. The lands to the west is thought to mean California, although why Lombardy in France is mentioned we do not know. The fact remains that this could simply be yet another one of the 1,000 predictions that are so obscure they could mean almost anything from any period in history. Nostradamus explains that the reason his prophecies are so obscure was to avoid persecution from the Inquisition. He also gives this as the reasoning why the quatrains are not in chronological order. Nostradamus left his predictions in the form of almost 1,000 4-line verses called quatrains and a collection of 6-line verses called sixteens. The prophecies are not sequential by date, which makes it easier to attribute any of them to any tale you want from any period. Although there are many coincidences, it does not prove accurate prophecy. There are no accuracies, no specific dates, no specific places. Nothing specific, actually. Nostradamus concealed his meanings in symbols, anagrams, mythology, and mixed it up with all the use of several old languages. He combined 3 languages, mixed it all together with symbolism and cryptic messages, and then put them in 4-line verses. However, followers repeat that Nostradamus had to hide his meanings because of the Catholic Church, but he did not use magic and was followed and patronised by the powerful elite, and thus he was protected. He was not prosecuted. He could have been more specific. Followers also say that his visions into the future must have been so confusing to a man of the 16th century. Seeing the technology of the 21st century would have confused him greatly, they say. He would not have had the language to explain airplanes, for instance. In short, his use of language was chaotic and obscure. He hid locations and people in symbolism and anagrams. He's referenced astrological readings that most could not even understand, and thus confused people even more. In addition to this, astrological readings are by their very nature vague. Vagueness upon vagueness. However, we have seen some of the past events that Nostradamus supposedly predicted. Are there prophecies for our future? There are indeed, and one of them is quite scary and speaks of the coming 3 antichrists. Nostradamus speaks of 3 powerful and tyrannical leaders that he calls antichrists. He said they would lead their people through reigns of terror after first seducing them with promises of greatness. Napoleon is thought to have been the first of these antichrists. Here's what he said about Napoleon. An emperor shall be born near Italy, who shall cost the empire dear. They shall say, with what people he keeps company, he shall be found less a prince than a butcher. Napoleon was indeed considered a butcher, even by his supporters, and he did cost the French Empire dearly in both manpower and political strength. From a simple soldier he will rise to the empire. From the short robe he will attain the long. Great swarms of bees shall arise. Amazingly, when Napoleon became emperor, he took on the symbol of the beehive on his imperial crest. Was he a simple soldier? Well, he was born on the island of Corsica, which followers say is an unlikely place for a future emperor to emerge. Napoleon destroyed Moscow, and some believe that is what Nostradamus was pointing to when he wrote, "A great troop shall come through Russia. The destroyer shall ruin a city." Napoleon's forces in fact advanced too far into the country and got trapped in the Russian winter. Napoleon had to retreat, and this is what Nostradamus said. The rear guard will make defence. The exhausted ones will die in the White Territory.
From Red Square to the battlefront.
He also said, the great empire will soon be exchanged for a small place, which will soon begin to grow. A small place of tiny area in the middle of which he will come to lay down his sceptre. The captive prince, conquered, is sent to Elba. He will sail across the Gulf of Genoa to Marseille. By a great effort of the foreign forces he is overcome. Though he escape the fire, his bees yield blood by the barrel. Amazingly, Napoleon was exiled to the small island of Elba, from which he escaped for 100 days. After a defeat at Waterloo, he relinquished all power for exile on tiny St. Helena. So that's the first Antichrist. Who was the second? Nostradamus wrote about a man stained with murder, the great enemy of the human race, one who was worse than any who had gone before, bloody and inhuman. Most followers of Nostradamus agree that he was referring to Adolf Hitler. We have already heard the following quatrain about Hitler. Out of the deepest part of the west of Europe, from poor people a young child shall be born, who with his tongue shall seduce many people, his fame shall increase in the eastern kingdom. Born to poor parents, powerful speaker, uniting with Japan. But Nostradamus also tells us about Hitler in other ways. Here's what he said. He shall come to tyrannize the land. He shall raise up a hatred that had long been dormant. The child of Germany observes no law. Cries and tears, fire, blood and battle. A captain of Germany shall come to yield himself by false hope, so that his revolt shall cause great bloodshed. Anybody who knows the history of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party will now see the similarities. This child of Germany seduced his people and raised a dormant threat. He did ignore all the treaties from World War I, or as Nostradamus said, the child of Germany observes no law. He did raise false hope, and he did bring great bloodshed. One thing we know is that the death of Hitler has been surrounded in mystery. Was his body swept away by the Russians? Was it completely destroyed? Did he live and escape to South America? Nostradamus supposedly predicted the rise, life, death, and uncertainty of the evil Hitler. Here's what he said. Near the Rhine, from the Austrian mountains, will be born a great man of the people, come too late, a man who will defend Poland and Hungary, and whose fate will never be certain. So there we have two Antichrists. What about the third? This evildoer will be more hideous than the other two. Firstly, Nostradamus tells us where this man will emerge. Out of the country of Greater Arabia shall be born a strong master of Mohammed. He will enter Europe wearing a blue turban. He will be the terror of mankind. Never more horror. To our modern Western ears, this sounds like some kind of terrible Islamic terrorist. From Greater Arabia, a strong master of Mohammed, entering Europe, and he will be the terror of mankind. Scared yet? Is Nostradamus telling us that a great man from Greater Arabia is going to invade Europe with his army? But what will be the outcome? Well, he explains. In the year 1999 and 7 months, from the sky will come the great king of terror. He will bring back to life the king of the Mongols, before and after war reigns. Of course, there's a problem here with the date, isn't there? Well, not necessarily. In 1999 and 7 months, a great terror comes. Well, the 7th month is July, and not a lot happened in 1999 in terrorist circles. What did happen was this: a series of massive terrorist attacks in Russia, killing more than 300 people and injuring over 1,000. The official Russian investigation of the bombings was completed in 2002 and concluded that all the bombings were organised and led by a Russian who remains at large and ordered 2 infamous Islamic warlords who have since been killed. Five other suspects have been killed and 6 have been convicted by Russian courts on terrorism-related charges. However, according to historians, the bombings were coordinated by the Russian state security services to bring Putin into the presidency. Now this really is ushering in a period of instability. Both the West and the East support opposing sides in the worldwide terrorist scene, and Putin has been a big player. Is he the third Antichrist, helping to bring Arabian terrorist army into Europe? According to Nostradamus, this will all bring about a third world war that will last 27 years. The world will come face to face with its final destruction. Here's what he says. The sky will burn at 45 degrees. Fire approaches the great new city. So 45 degrees latitude and a new city. This is New York. A great fire will approach New York City, and as Nostradamus says, by fire he will destroy their city. A cold and cruel heart. Blood will pour, mercy to none. Doesn't sound too good, does it? So how does Nostradamus believe this will all end? When those of the northern pole are united, in the east will be great fear and dread. One day the 2 great leaders will be friends. Their great power will be seen to grow. The new land will be at the height of its power. To the man of blood, the number is reported. So basically, Nostradamus is telling us there will be a peace between East and West. This new land is what they knew as America, and the countries of the Northern Pole is quite possibly Russia. So it seems these 2 nations will use terrorism to bring about a third world war, and then after 27 years a peace accord will be signed. Of course, all of this is wide open to interpretation. Things just aren't specific, and we have to make huge assumptions. So-called experts have been doing this for centuries. Apparently, the world is going to end in 1666, 1999, 2012, and now 2096, even though Nostradamus never in fact said any of that. In fact, he said we would overcome and survive. He even said that we could change the course of these events if we wanted to. He did predict the end of the world, but the dates are argued over and could be 3786 or 3797. Before we get carried away by all of this, we have to remember that the man was not at all what he seemed, and that his prophecies were so vague they can and have been twisted and turned with every passing year. There is more to Nostradamus than his published prophecies. In fact, he wrote letters, and there is one particular letter he wrote to his newborn son called Caesar. In this letter, he wrote about future events and the end of times. He predicted that the world would go through a series of great floods. These floods would end in a great catastrophe for mankind. A huge comet storm would hit planet Earth. After this, there is nothing. It's almost as if he's telling us there will be no future for mankind. Never in the history of mankind has there been a time when this could possibly come true. Now is the time. Humanity has caused such utter calamity and destruction on our beautiful planet that we have in fact instigated our own death. We have caused the earth to warm through our poisonous behaviour, and this is melting the icebergs of the world. The seas are rising, coastal regions are disappearing at alarming rates, and the poisoned oceans of the world are heading our way. Never in the history of mankind could we safely predict a storm of comets, because never in the history of mankind has there been the technology for humanity to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles at each other. To a man from the 16th century, such things would appear to be comets, great streaming strands of fire and smoke falling down to earth before our eyes and bringing the end of mankind as we know it. This is exactly what Nostradamus wrote to his child. But, my son, I tell you that I have seen it thus. There will be floods of such nature that no place on this world will not be affected, and for a long time everything will be beneath the surface of water, and everything will be destroyed, with the exception of the weather and space. After these floods, such a great amount of fire of glowing stones will fall from the sky that nothing will be able to escape this last destructive firestorm. The problem is that the dating is difficult. It may be that he indicated this would happen 7,000 years after his writing of the letter, but this goes against other prediction dates for the end of the world. Again, the vagueness causes problems. The events of flood and glowing stones falling from the sky are not vague, and we now know what these could mean. There are, though, more clues about the end times when we return to his prophecies about the third Antichrist. We turn back to his specifics about the army employed by this evildoer. The army of the enemy of peace will march towards Europe. They will emerge from the south of Russia, and through Turkey they will invade Europe. This army will also have a naval counterpart that Nostradamus called the Libyan fleet. It will move into the Mediterranean, and there will be a massive naval war in the Adriatic. Malta, Sicily, Sardinia and other islands will be destroyed. Again, never in the history of mankind has there been such firepower with the ability to wipe out islands until now. Throughout this conflict, it is believed that Russia will be against the West, although Nostradamus is not clear. He does state that the Russians will be friendly with the West eventually, and that their leader will be the one who will set things right. The reason for this is because Russia soon realises that they need to ally themselves with the West in order to defeat the Easterners. These Easterners are in reality the people of China and various former Soviet nations. In addition to these Easterners will be allied with the Islamic nations of Asia and the Middle East. So it appears the West and Russia will be at war with the East in a clear divide of ideologies and religions. Again, looking at world events today, it is not a stretch of the imagination to realise that China and the Muslim world could easily find themselves at war with the mainly Christian materialistic West. There are already so many issues that could spark international conflict. How could Nostradamus have known this in the 16th century? He couldn't. It seems that this third Antichrist will bring the non-destructive nations against the armies of Christ. And he also states that the Christians will be faced with terrible persecution and tortures. This terrifying war will last for almost 28 years, and both sides will suffer horrendous casualties. Our cities will be struck by these large shining rocks that fall from the sky. In other words, ballistic missiles will strike New York and other major centres. As if this isn't enough, there will follow a great and dreadful pestilence that will wipe out 2/3 of the world's population. This could be nuclear radiation or the spread of disease as society breaks down. There are various dates all of this could happen. The next is 2024, and roughly every 2 years following that. As Nostradamus tells us, it all depends on the actions we take now. What we do know is that the predicted flood we spoke about earlier comes after the war with the Antichrist. Global warming will melt the ice, bring about widespread rainfall, and following this, more breakdown of society and spread of disease. In addition to all of this, it is thought that global warming and the melting of ice caps could cause the planet to shift on its axis, causing tidal floods to worsen. Our position in the solar system would even alter and cause us to move even closer to the sun. In fact, the Earth is actually overdue for a polar shift, even without man-made global warming. There is absolutely no way a man from the 16th century could have known about any of this. He had some way to see into the future. The future appears to be a terrifying prospect that must have caused Nostradamus to lose sleep. There is no wonder that he tried to tell us. But his message across the years is still very strong and true, that the future does not need to be this way, that we can make a difference and we can stop these things from happening. The question is, will we listen?